My mom got thrown out of the city council meeting for refusing to sit down, and I couldn't stop clapping. The developer was bribing officials. She held up her phone and said, "I have recordings of every payment you made to the planning board." The FBI arrived the next morning. The security guard grabbed my mother by the arm, and 53 people in that auditorium gasped at the exact same moment. Not because a 61-year-old retired schoolteacher was being physically removed from a public meeting. Not because Council President Donald Whitmore was screaming for order while his face turned the color of raw beef. They gasped because my mother, Eleanor Brennan, 5'4" and maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, was holding her phone above her head like a weapon, and the man in the $3,000 suit at the podium had gone completely pale. Victor Ashworth, CEO of Ashworth Development Partners, hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. He just stood there with his mouth slightly open while my mother's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. 19 payments, Victor. I have recordings of every single one. The envelopes, the amounts, the dates, the names of every council member who took your money. She was still talking as they dragged her toward the exit. You want to build your towers on top of my neighborhood? You're going to have to explain to the FBI why you paid $400,000 in cash bribes to make it happen. I was sitting in the third row, and I started clapping. Not slow, sarcastic clapping. Real applause, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest when you've been waiting months for a moment like this. A few people joined in, then a few more. By the time the security guard got my mother through the double doors, half the room was on their feet. Victor Ashworth was gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. And Donald Whitmore was slamming his gavel so hard, I thought he might put it through the table. This meeting is adjourned. Everyone out. Now. I didn't move. I just sat there watching the chaos unfold, watching Ashworth's lawyers huddle around him like he'd been shot, watching the council members exchange panicked glances across the dais. My phone buzzed. Text from my mother. Meet me at the car. Don't talk to anyone. I walked out of that auditorium with the biggest smile I'd had in 6 months, because I knew what was coming. And I knew that every single person who had tried to destroy our neighborhood, silence our complaints, and bulldoze our homes was about to learn what happens when you underestimate Eleanor Brennan. I should probably tell you how we got here. How a retired 5th-grade teacher ended up taking down one of the most powerful real estate developers on the East Coast. How our quiet little neighborhood became ground zero for one of the biggest municipal corruption scandals in our state's history. It started 18 months ago, with a letter. I'd been living in my childhood home for about 3 years at that point. After my divorce, I moved back to Riverside Heights to help take care of my dad during his chemo treatments. He passed 8 months later, and I just never left. The house was paid off, my mom needed company, and honestly, I needed somewhere to rebuild my life. Riverside Heights isn't fancy. It's a working-class neighborhood on the east side of the city, about 40 square blocks of small houses built in the 1950s, tree-lined streets, porches where people actually sit and talk to their neighbors. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where kids still play in the street, where the same families have lived for 3 generations. It's also, as we would soon learn, sitting on some of the most valuable undeveloped land within city limits. The letter came from the city planning office. Notice of proposed zoning change. I almost threw it away. My mother didn't. She read every word, then read it again, then called me into the kitchen with that look on her face, the one that meant someone had made a serious mistake. They want to rezone the entire neighborhood for high-density commercial development. She slid the letter across the table. Mixed-use towers, retail space, luxury apartments. I skimmed it. They can't just do that. People live here. This is residential. She pointed at a paragraph near the bottom. They can if the council approves it. There's a public hearing scheduled for next month. I remember thinking it was nothing. A formality. No way the council would approve destroying a 60-year-old neighborhood to build condos for rich people. I was so naive, it's almost embarrassing to think about now. My mother wasn't naive. She'd been teaching in this city's public schools for 34 years. She knew exactly how things worked around here, who had power, who owed favors, and what happened to regular people when they got in the way of money. I'm going to that hearing, she said, and I'm going to find out who's really behind this. The public hearing was standing room only. 200 residents packed into the community center on Maple Street, most of them angry, confused, or both. The planning board sat at a long table at the front of the room, 5 members in business casual, shuffling papers and avoiding eye contact with the crowd. The board chair was a man named Gerald Okonkwo, 22 years in city government, salt and pepper hair, reading glasses perched on his nose. He called the meeting to order and immediately started reading from a prepared script about economic revitalization and community investment opportunities. Then the developer's presentation began. Victor Ashworth himself took the podium, tall, silver-haired, the kind of tan you only get from expensive vacations. He smiled at the crowd like we were old friends. I know change can be scary, he said, but what we're proposing isn't the destruction of your community. It's its transformation. Riverside Towers will bring thousands of jobs, millions in tax revenue, and world-class amenities to an area that, frankly, has been overlooked for far too long. Someone behind me muttered something unprintable. Ashworth kept smiling. Of course, current residents will be compensated fairly for their properties. We're prepared to offer above-market rates for voluntary relocation. Voluntary. That word hung in the air like poison gas. My mother stood up during the public comment period. She was wearing her good blazer, the navy blue one she used to wear to parent-teacher conferences. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who'd spent 3 decades commanding the attention of distracted 10-year-olds. Mr. Ashworth, I have a few questions about your proposal. First, how many of the 4,300 residents currently living in the proposed development zone have been directly consulted about this project? Ashworth's smile flickered. We've conducted extensive community outreach through the proper channels. Through the proper channels. Which channels would those be? Because I've lived in this neighborhood for 38 years, and I didn't hear about this proposal until the zoning notice arrived in my mailbox 2 weeks ago. Murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Gerald Okonkwo cleared his throat. Ma'am, public notice was posted according to all applicable regulations. My mother turned to face him. Mr. Okonkwo, the regulations require notice to be posted in a newspaper of general circulation. Which newspaper was that? Silence. I checked. The notice ran once in the Westfield Business Journal, circulation 1200, primarily distributed in the financial district. Not exactly general circulation for working families in Riverside Heights. Ashworth was still smiling, but his eyes had gone cold. I appreciate your passion, ma'am, but these procedural matters are really for the planning board to address. My mother didn't sit down. She pulled a folder from her bag. I also have some questions about your company's track record, Mr. Ashworth, specifically the Greenwood Commons project in 2019. The room went quiet. Greenwood Commons was supposed to bring jobs and economic development to the Greenwood neighborhood. 3 years later, half the units are still empty, 2 of the 3 anchor retail tenants have pulled out, and property values in the surrounding area have dropped by 18%. She held up a printout. These are your own financial disclosures, filed with the State Commerce Department. The project is currently $34 million underwater. Ashworth's smile was gone now. Every development involves risk. Greenwood faced unique challenges that nobody could have predicted. Including the environmental contamination you knew about before construction began? Dead silence. My mother pulled another document from her folder. This is a soil analysis report commissioned by Ashworth Development Partners in March 2018, 6 months before ground was broken. It clearly indicates elevated levels of industrial solvents in the groundwater. Your company proceeded anyway, then acted surprised when the EPA investigation began. Gerald Okonkwo stood up. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to limit your comments to the current proposal. My mother looked at him. Just looked. I will, Mr. Okonkwo, as soon as you explain why you've met privately with Mr. Ashworth 4 times in the past 2 months. The room erupted. Okonkwo's face went red. Ashworth was already packing up his presentation materials, his lawyers whispering urgently in his ear. My mother raised her voice over the chaos. I filed a public records request 3 weeks ago. I have the visitor logs from your office, Mr. Okonkwo. 4 meetings, none of which appear in your official calendar, none of which were disclosed to the other board members. She turned to face the crowd. This isn't a public hearing. This is theater. The decision has already been made, and we're just here to provide the appearance of community input. Gerald Okonkwo slammed his gavel. This meeting is adjourned. We'll reschedule the hearing for a later date. People were on their feet now, shouting, demanding answers. My mother gathered her documents and walked calmly toward the exit. I caught up with her in the parking lot. Mom, that was incredible. How did you get all that information? She smiled. I was a teacher for 34 years, sweetheart. I know how to do research. I also know when someone is lying to my face. She unlocked her car. This isn't over. Not even close. They thought we would roll over and accept this. They thought we were too poor, too uneducated, too powerless to fight back. She looked at me with those steady gray eyes. They were wrong. Over the next 3 months, my mother became the de facto leader of the Riverside Heights resistance, which is what the local news started calling us. She organized community meetings, filed public records requests by the dozen, and built a network of volunteers who knocked on every door in the neighborhood explaining what was at stake. I helped where I could, but honestly, most of the heavy lifting was her. She had a gift for it, for making people feel heard, for turning anger into action, for keeping hope alive even when the news was bad, and the news was often bad. The planning board approved the zoning change 6 weeks after that first meeting, despite everything my mother had revealed. The vote was 4-1, with only one dissenting member, a woman named Priya Sharma, who called the process fundamentally compromised and demanded an independent investigation. Nobody listened. The city council scheduled a final vote for the following month. If they approved the development agreement, Ashworth would have the legal authority to begin acquiring properties through eminent domain. Our homes, our neighborhood, our entire community would be sacrificed on the altar of Victor Ashworth's profit margin. We had 30 days to stop it. I need to get inside, my mother said one evening, staring at her laptop screen. Inside what? Inside Ashworth's operation. The official records only tell part of the story. I need to know how the money moves, who's getting paid, and how they're covering their tracks. I should have realized then what she was planning. I should have asked more questions, pushed back, reminded her that she was 61 years old with high blood pressure and no business playing investigative journalist. But I didn't, because part of me wanted to believe she could do it, that she could find the evidence we needed and expose the whole rotten system for what it was. What I didn't know was that she'd already found an inside source. His name was Raymond Castellano, and he'd worked as a project manager for Ashworth Development for 11 years. He'd also been passed over for promotion 3 times, watched his pension get gutted during a corporate restructuring, and developed a serious grudge against his employer. My mother met him at a coffee shop near the Ashworth corporate office. I don't know how she found him or convinced him to talk. She never told me the details, said it was better if I didn't know. What she did tell me was that Raymond had access to financial records that never made it into official filings, records that showed a pattern of cash payments to city officials going back at least 5 years. He's scared, she said. He knows what happens to whistleblowers in this town, but he's also angry enough to take the risk. She paused. He's going to copy the files and bring them to me next week. The handoff happened at a grocery store parking lot on a Saturday morning. I was there as lookout, sitting in my car 2 rows away, pretending to scroll through my phone while my mother waited by her Camry. Raymond showed up in a gray sedan, pulled into the spot next to her, and handed her a manila envelope through his window. The whole exchange took maybe 15 seconds. He drove away without saying a word. My mother got into her car and sat there for a long moment, holding the envelope like it might explode. Then she opened it. I watched her face change as she flipped through the pages. Watched her eyes go wide, then narrow, then harden into something I'd never seen before. She looked up and caught my eye through the windshield. Her expression said everything. We had them. The documents were devastating. Bank records showing cash withdrawals from a shell company owned by Ashworth Development, corresponding deposits and accounts linked to 4 of the 5 planning board members, including Gerald Okonkwo. Payment schedules that matched perfectly with key votes on zoning variances and development approvals going back years. And handwritten notes, apparently from Ashworth himself, detailing the amounts and recipients of each payment. This is enough to put people in prison, I said, staring at the papers spread across my mother's kitchen table. It's enough to stop the project. She shook her head. It's not enough. Not yet. I didn't understand what she meant until she explained. The documents were compelling, but they were also stolen. Illegally obtained. Any lawyer worth their salt would get them thrown out before they ever saw the inside of a courtroom. We needed corroborating evidence, something gathered through legal means that proved the same pattern without relying on Raymond's files. More importantly, we needed to catch them in the act. Ashworth has a final meeting scheduled with the council members before the vote, my mother said. Private meeting, off the books, at Donald Whitmore's house. Donald Whitmore was the council president. 63 years old, 28 years in local politics, rumored to be eyeing a state senate run. He was also, according to Raymond's documents, the biggest recipient of Ashworth's generosity, with payments totaling nearly $150,000 over the past 4 years. How do you know about the meeting? I asked. My mother smiled. Donald Whitmore's housekeeper is married to my cousin's brother-in-law. People in this town talk, especially to people they've known for 40 years. She pulled out a legal pad covered in her neat handwriting. The meeting is next Thursday evening, 7 o'clock, at Whitmore's estate in Crestwood. Mom, what are you planning? What she was planning, it turned out, was the most audacious thing I'd ever heard. She was going to record the meeting. You can't just sneak into the council president's house, I said, hearing the panic in my own voice. That's breaking and entering. That's a felony. I'm not going to break in. I'm going to be invited. She explained. Whitmore's housekeeper, Dolores Medina, had worked for him for 12 years. She'd seen things over those years, heard things, and kept her mouth shut because she needed the job and feared the consequences of speaking up. But she was also disgusted by what she'd witnessed, and when my mother approached her through family connections, she agreed to help. Dolores is going to let me into the house before the meeting starts. I'll be in the study with recording equipment while they have their little gathering in the living room. My heart was pounding. Mom, this is insane. If they catch you, you'll go to prison. Whitmore has connections everywhere. He'll bury you. She looked at me with those steady gray eyes. They're going to bury our entire neighborhood if we don't stop them. 4,300 people, most of them families who've lived here for generations, are going to lose their homes, so Victor Ashworth can build luxury condos for people who already have more money than they know what to do with. She reached across the table and took my hand. I've spent my whole life teaching children that the truth matters, that doing the right thing matters. What kind of example would I be setting if I walked away now because I was scared? I couldn't talk her out of it. Believe me, I tried. I spent the next week coming up with every possible argument, every alternative approach, every reason why this was a terrible idea. She listened patiently to all of it, then went ahead with her plan anyway. The night of the meeting, I drove her to Whitmore's neighborhood and parked 2 blocks away. She was wearing dark clothes, carrying a small bag with her recording equipment, looking more like a cat burglar than a retired teacher. If anything goes wrong, call this number. She handed me a business card. Special Agent Robert Talmadge, FBI Public Corruption Unit. I've already briefed him on what we have. If I get caught, he'll know what to do. I stared at her. You've been talking to the FBI? For 3 weeks. Raymond's documents were enough to open an investigation, but they need evidence gathered through legal means. What I'm doing tonight might be questionable, but it's not illegal. This state has one-party consent for recordings. As long as I'm present for the conversation, I can record it. You're not going to be in the conversation. You're going to be hiding in another room. She smiled. That's a legal gray area they can argue about later. Right now, I need to go. She hugged me. I'll text you when I'm done. If you don't hear from me by 10 o'clock, call Talmadge. Then she walked away into the darkness, and I sat in my car praying I wasn't about to watch my mother destroy her life. The longest 3 hours of my life passed in that car. I checked my phone every 30 seconds, jumping at every notification, every passing car, every distant siren. I imagined police cruisers surrounding Whitmore's house, my mother being led away in handcuffs, news cameras capturing her humiliation. I imagined Victor Ashworth laughing, Gerald Okonkwo smirking, the whole corrupt system grinding on unchanged, while we rotted in cells for daring to challenge it. At 9:47, my phone buzzed. Text from Mom. Got everything. Coming out now. Stay calm. 2 minutes later, she appeared at the end of the block, walking briskly but not running. She got into the car, and I could see her hands were shaking, but her eyes were bright, almost feverish. Drive. Don't speed. Don't do anything to attract attention. Just drive. I drove. What happened? She held up her phone. I have recordings of Victor Ashworth personally handing cash to Donald Whitmore, Gerald Okonkwo, and 2 other council members. I have him explicitly stating that the payments are in exchange for their votes on the Riverside Heights project. I have Whitmore joking about how easy it is to manipulate those people into accepting their fate. She laughed, a slightly unhinged sound. And I have footage of Ashworth threatening to destroy anyone who crosses him. He mentioned Raymond by name, said he knows there's a leak in his organization, and he's going to handle it after the vote goes through. My blood went cold. We have to warn Raymond. We called him from a burner phone my mother had bought specifically for this purpose. No answer. Called again. Nothing. I drove to his apartment while my mother tried his number over and over. When we got there, the lights were off, his car was gone, and there was a for rent sign in the window that hadn't been there the week before. Raymond Castellano had vanished. They got to him, I said, feeling sick. Or he got out while he still could. My mother's voice was grim. Either way, we're on our own now. We spent the rest of that night making copies of everything. The original recordings went into a safety deposit box at a bank across town. Copies went to 3 different cloud storage services under encrypted accounts. We mailed USB drives to my mother's sister in California, to my college roommate in Boston, to a former colleague of hers who'd retired to Florida. If anything happened to us, the evidence would survive. Then my mother called Special Agent Robert Talmadge and told him everything. I listened to her side of the conversation, watched her face cycle through emotions as Talmadge asked questions, raised concerns, and finally agreed to meet with her the next day to review what she'd gathered. When she hung up, she looked exhausted, but relieved. He says we have enough, more than enough. But he needs time to build the case properly, get warrants, coordinate with local prosecutors who aren't compromised. How long? Weeks, maybe months. She rubbed her eyes. The vote is in 12 days. The next 12 days were a masterclass in controlled chaos. On one front, my mother continued her public campaign against the development, attending every council meeting, filing every possible objection, keeping the pressure on through media appearances and community organizing. On another front, Special Agent Talmadge and his team were quietly building their case, interviewing witnesses, subpoenaing bank records, and assembling the evidence needed for arrest warrants. The 2 tracks weren't supposed to intersect. The FBI wanted to keep their investigations secret until they were ready to move. My mother agreed to cooperate, to avoid doing anything that might tip off the targets. But then, Victor Ashworth made a mistake. 3 days before the final vote, he held a press conference announcing a generous community benefits package for Riverside Heights residents. Relocation assistance, job training programs, priority hiring for construction positions. He stood in front of a banner that read, "Building Tomorrow's Community Together," and smiled at the cameras like he was doing us all a favor. My mother was in the audience. She hadn't planned to say anything, just wanted to observe, to see him up close one more time before justice caught up with him. But then a reporter asked about the allegations of corruption that had been circulating on social media, and Ashworth laughed. Actually laughed. "Look, there are always going to be people who resist progress," he said, still smiling. "Some folks in that neighborhood have spread some pretty wild conspiracy theories about this project. Bribery, corruption, secret meetings. It's all nonsense, of course. But I understand where it comes from. Change is scary. When you've lived in the same place for decades, the idea of something new can feel threatening." He shook his head with practiced sympathy. "I hope those folks will eventually see that what we're offering is an opportunity, not a threat. And I hope they'll stop spreading lies that damage the reputations of hardworking public servants who are just trying to do their jobs." My mother stood up. Every head in the room turned toward her. "Mr. Ashworth, I have a question." His smile flickered. He recognized her, I could tell. "Ma'am, this is a press conference. Questions are for credentialed media only." "Then consider this a statement." She pulled out her phone. "You just called the allegations of corruption nonsense and lies. Would you like to explain this?" She held up the phone. Even from where I was standing in the back, I could hear Ashworth's voice coming from the tiny speaker, clear as day. That's another $50,000 for Whitmore. He's getting greedy, but we need his vote, so pay the man. The room went dead silent. Ashworth's face went through several colors in rapid succession. His lawyers started moving toward him. His PR team was already on their phones, probably trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. My mother didn't stop. She advanced toward the podium, still holding her phone, still playing the recording. You want to hear more? Here's you telling Gerald Okonkwo exactly what to say at the planning board meeting. Here's you discussing how to handle employees who ask too many questions. Here's you threatening to destroy the career of anyone who opposes you. Security guards were converging on her now, but she kept talking, her voice cutting through the chaos. You thought you could buy this city, Mr. Ashworth. You thought your money made you untouchable. You were wrong. They escorted her out of the building, but the damage was done. Every reporter in that room had captured the audio. Every camera had recorded Ashworth's face as the mask slipped. By the time I got to my mother in the parking lot, her phone was already blowing up with interview requests. That wasn't the plan, I said, half angry, half awed. I know. She was breathing hard, but her eyes were shining. Sometimes you have to improvise. The story exploded. Local news, then regional, then national. Small-town teacher takes on corrupt developer made for irresistible television, especially with the audio clips my mother had released. Victor Ashworth went into damage control mode, issuing statements through his lawyers, denying everything, threatening defamation suits against anyone who repeated the allegations. It didn't matter. The recordings were too clear, too damning, and once the story broke, other people started coming forward. Former employees with their own horror stories, residents from other neighborhoods Ashworth had bulldozed, journalists who'd been investigating him for years but never had enough evidence to publish. The FBI moved up their timeline. Special Agent Talmadge called my mother the morning after the press conference explosion. We're going to need you to come in and make a formal statement, and we're going to need the original recordings. My mother handed over everything. Every file, every backup, every piece of evidence she'd gathered over months of investigation. She also gave them something else. The names and contact information of a dozen potential witnesses, people she'd identified through her research who might have information relevant to the case. Talmadge looked at the list and shook his head slowly. Mrs. Brennan, have you ever considered a career in law enforcement? She smiled. I prefer teaching. The hours are better. The final city council meeting was scheduled for the following week. Despite everything that had happened, despite the recordings and the media coverage and the FBI investigation, the vote was still going forward. Donald Whitmore insisted on it, claiming the allegations were unsubstantiated and the council had a duty to the taxpayers to make a decision on the development agreement. I think he believed even then that he could still win, that his connections would protect him, that the system would bend around him one more time. The auditorium was packed, standing room only, with overflow crowds watching on screens in the lobby. Every major news outlet in the state had sent crews. There were protesters outside, both for and against the development, their chants creating a constant background noise that filtered through the walls. My mother and I were in the third row. She was wearing her navy blazer again, the one from the first public hearing 18 months ago. Her folder of documents sat in her lap, though she probably wouldn't need it. Everything was already out in the open now. The meeting began with public comments. For 2 hours, residents stood up and shared their stories. Families who'd lived in Riverside Heights for generations, small business owners who would lose everything if the development went through, elderly residents who had nowhere else to go. Then the council members spoke. One by one, they gave their statements. Some were clearly nervous, glancing at the cameras, choosing their words carefully. Gerald Okonkwo wasn't there. He'd resigned from the planning board 3 days earlier, citing personal reasons. 2 other council members had suddenly discovered scheduling conflicts that prevented them from attending. That left 3 voting members, including Donald Whitmore. After careful consideration of all relevant factors, Whitmore began, reading from prepared remarks, I believe this development represents the best path forward for our city's economic future. My mother stood up. Point of order. Whitmore looked up, his face hardening. Ma'am, this is not the public comment period. Please sit down. She didn't sit down. I have information directly relevant to your statement, Mr. Whitmore. Information the public has a right to hear before any vote takes place. Whitmore's gavel came down. Security, please escort this woman from the chamber. 2 guards started moving toward her. My mother reached into her folder and pulled out her phone. I have recordings of you accepting cash payments from Victor Ashworth. 19 separate payments over 4 years, totaling $147,000. I have you on tape discussing exactly how to manipulate this vote. The guards hesitated. The crowd was on its feet. Whitmore was shouting, his face purple, his gavel crashing down again and again. Remove her! Remove her now! They grabbed her arms. She didn't resist, but she didn't stop talking either. I have recordings of every payment you made to the planning board, she shouted, loud enough for every camera to hear. The FBI has the originals. They're executing search warrants as we speak. That last part wasn't technically true. Not yet. But the effect was immediate. Whitmore froze. The other council members looked at each other in panic, and Victor Ashworth, who had been sitting in the front row looking smug and confident, went absolutely white. The guards pulled my mother toward the exit. I stood up and started clapping. Not because it was over, but because she'd done it. She'd stood up to every one of them, refused to be silenced, refused to back down, and made them hear the truth whether they wanted to or not. Others joined in. Then more. By the time she reached the doors, half the auditorium was applauding, their cheers drowning out Whitmore's desperate calls for order. "This meeting is adjourned," he screamed, but nobody was listening anymore. The story was already writing itself, cameras capturing every moment, reporters already filing their updates, the whole rotten system cracking apart in real time. I found my mother in the parking lot, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. She answered them calmly, professionally, like she'd been doing press conferences her whole life instead of parent-teacher nights. Yes, she had evidence of systematic corruption. Yes, she'd been working with federal investigators. Yes, she believed justice would be served. No, she wasn't afraid of retaliation. "I spent 34 years teaching children that the truth matters," she said, looking directly into the cameras. "That doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I couldn't live with myself if I'd stayed silent while they destroyed my community." We didn't go home that night. Special Agent Talmadge had arranged for us to stay at a hotel outside the city, just in case anyone decided to do something stupid. The FBI had indeed executed search warrants that evening, hitting Whitmore's home, Ashworth's office, and several other locations simultaneously. By midnight, they had enough physical evidence to corroborate everything in my mother's recordings. The arrests began the next morning. I was eating breakfast in the hotel restaurant when my phone started buzzing with news alerts. Donald Whitmore, taken into custody at his home. Gerald Okonkwo, arrested at the airport trying to board a flight to Miami. 2 other council members, picked up at their offices. And Victor Ashworth, led out of his corporate headquarters in handcuffs while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions he refused to answer. The charges were extensive: bribery, public corruption, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. Federal prosecutors estimated that Ashworth's operation had funneled over $2 million to local officials over the past decade, buying approvals for developments across 3 counties. The Riverside Heights project was just the most recent, most brazen example. My mother watched the coverage with a strange expression on her face. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a kind of quiet relief. "It's really over," she said. "No." I shook my head. "It's really just beginning. The trials, the appeals, the legal battles. This is going to go on for years." "I know." She smiled. "But they can't build their towers now. They can't take people's homes. That part is over." She was right. With the council members under indictment and Ashworth's company collapsing into bankruptcy, the Riverside Heights development was dead. The zoning changes were reversed. The eminent domain threats evaporated. 4,300 people got to stay in their homes. My mother became something of a local celebrity after that. The teacher who took down the corrupt developer. News profiles, podcast interviews, even a mention in the mayor's State of the City address. She handled it all with the same calm dignity she'd shown throughout the whole ordeal, deflecting praise and insisting the real heroes were the community members who'd organized, marched, and refused to give up. The trials took 18 months. I attended most of them, sitting in the gallery, watching the legal machinery grind through evidence I'd seen gathered in real time. Victor Ashworth was convicted on 12 counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Donald Whitmore got 8 years. Gerald Okonkwo cooperated with prosecutors and received 5 years, reduced for testimony against the others. The 2 other council members took plea deals and got probation plus fines. Raymond Castellano, we learned, had disappeared into witness protection the night before we tried to contact him. The FBI had pulled him out when they realized Ashworth was onto him. He testified via video link, his face obscured, his voice altered, but his evidence was crucial in securing the convictions. Priya Sharma, the one planning board member who'd voted against the project, was appointed interim council president. Her first act was to establish an independent ethics oversight committee. Her second was to name the new community center in Riverside Heights after my mother. My mom cried when she heard. It was the only time I saw her cry through the whole thing. 6 months after the final sentencing, I was helping my mother clean out the garage when I found the folder. The original one, from before everything went digital, before the FBI got involved, before any of it became national news. Just handwritten notes, newspaper clippings, printouts from her early research. Right on top was a sticky note in her neat handwriting. "They think we won't fight back." I laughed out loud. She came over to see what I'd found. "Oh, that. I wrote that the night after the first planning board meeting. After Ashworth smiled at us like we were stupid. After Okonkwo shut me down for asking questions." She took the folder from my hands, flipped through it slowly. I was so angry that night. Angry and scared and not sure what to do about either feeling. She looked at me. But I knew I wasn't going to let them win without a fight. I hugged her. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know." She hugged me back. "I'm proud of you too. For being there. For supporting me. For not trying too hard to talk me out of the crazy parts." I laughed. "I definitely tried to talk you out of the crazy parts." You did, but not too hard. You knew I had to do it. She was right. I had known. Because she'd spent my whole life teaching me the same thing she'd taught thousands of students over 3 decades. That the truth matters. That doing the right thing matters. That sometimes you have to stand up and refuse to sit down, even when they're dragging you out the door. Last week, I drove through Riverside Heights for the first time in a while. The neighborhood looks the same as it always did. Small houses, tree-lined streets, kids playing on porches. The Brennan Community Center was having some kind of event, people spilling out onto the lawn, music playing, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air. I pulled over and watched for a few minutes. My mother was in the middle of it all, naturally, talking to neighbors, hugging former students, laughing at something someone said. She looked happy, peaceful, like a woman who had fought the hardest fight of her life and won, not just for herself, but for everyone around her. I thought about Victor Ashworth in his federal prison cell, about Donald Whitmore trying to rebuild his reputation from nothing, about Gerald Okonkwo explaining to his grandchildren why Grandpa went away for a while. Then I thought about the 4,300 people who still had their homes because one retired teacher refused to be silent. My mother caught my eye across the lawn and waved. I waved back. She didn't need to say anything. Neither did I. Some things you just know. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.